let's come back and do something like while counter greater than 0, print counter, learn to type. Okay, so get out of that. What's going to happen when I run this program?
Starts at 0? Counter is not defined.
I have not given counter a value before I try to use it, so Python will say, sorry, don't know what you're doing. Now, you might think it would be sensible for it to say, well, I guess that should be an integer. 0 is a good value to initialize integers with. No, Python does not do this. If you have not given a value to a variable, the variable does not exist. Python won't let you try to use the value, compare it to 0, add 1 to it, anything like that, until it exists. Okay? So if I switch back and run this program, it says, line 1, counter not defined. Okay? Ignore traceback. Explain what that means later. What it's telling me is on line 1 in something, the name counter is not defined. You haven't yet given me a value for this. Now, this is another important aspect of programming and programming languages that I want you to internalize. And if you ever break this rule, you will make me cry inside just a little bit. Okay? If you were programming in a language like Perl, I'm going to pick on Perl because I made this mistake a lot. This program would run. What it would do is say, you haven't told me what the variable counter is yet, but you're comparing it to a number, so it's probably a number, and 0 is a good value to initialize numbers with. Okay, we can fix all of these problems at the break, please. Okay, 0 is a good value to initialize numbers with. So it would say, well, I guess from context you want that to be a number. I'll give it the value 0. Okay, 0 is not greater than 0. The loop doesn't execute, but at least I could run your program for you. Right? Similarly, in Perl, it's not the only language that does this. If I said something like, while dash is not equal to that, dashes is increased by 1, it would say, no problem. I don't know what dashes is, but you're comparing it to a string, so it's probably a string, and I'll initialize it to the empty string. Right? It seems like a sensible behavior. And in fact, in some cases, it's rather helpful. I don't even have to tell you. If I start reading a program to you and say, look, while dashes is not equal to 3 hyphens, do this. I didn't have to say in English, talking to a human being, let's initialize dashes to the empty string, and now, while dashes is not equal to hyphen, 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 do something. Your brain just filled it in. Why can't our programming languages just fill it in? Let me show you why, and then I'll tell you why I'm belaboring this point. Okay. What should happen in Python if I say print 1 plus 2? I haven't picked on you recently. What's...
it will look at them and say they're able to add them together and print the result.
Yep, and that should be print, not print 1. My apologies for the typo on this keyboard. Okay. I expect that to be the integer 3. Okay. What happens if I say print string 1 plus string 2? I haven't picked on you yet. What do I get?
String 1 and 2.
Right, I get the digit 1 and the digit 2. I get a string 2 characters long. Okay. So far, so good. What should happen if I say print 1 plus 2? That's a string, digit 1. That's an integer 2. Let's hold off on that and take a look at this. If I say print the answer is plus 2, you almost certainly want to get the answer is 2. Right? If you showed that to a human being and said, okay, what's the output? They'd say, well, the answer is 2. Even though that's a string and that's an integer, in this case, it's pretty easy to see what the right answer is. Well, but what is it there? Is that the string 1, 2, Or is it the number 3? Because that is easy to convert into a number. That's the string representation. It's the digits 1. Well, I know how to convert a string of digits into a number. Right? So is that 3 or is it the string 12? It's ambiguous. Okay. Everybody see where the ambiguity comes from? Okay. Ambiguity is a bad thing. Because it means that different people will read this differently. They will look at this and they will make different mental assumptions about what it's actually going to do. That's bad. You want your code to be unambiguous. Here, where they got to in Perl was, well, we know what the right answer is here. The answer is, when in doubt, convert to string. Oh, we're in doubt. We'll convert to string. Okay? And yet, if you show this to people who've never used the language, about a quarter of them will guess that the answer should be 3, not that the answer should be the string 1, 2. I don't regard 25% as an acceptable error rate. In this case, Python says, I don't know how to do this. You have to convert that to a number or that to a string, and then I'm okay. But here, where you're asking me to guess what you intended, I'm not going to. I'm just going to say, you tell me what you intended. Okay? So we come back to what I said at 10:30. There's this spectrum of programming languages between those things that try to be helpful, forgiveness rather than permission, and on the other end, the ones that are very, very strict and won't let you add 1 to 2.5 because they say, well, that's an integer and that's a floating point number. You have to tell me whether you want me to do integer addition or floating point addition. Right? I regard that as, either paranoid or unhelpful, but either way, not good. Right? The answer of 1 plus 2.5 is 3.5. But a mathematician would say, well, no, you have to tell me, are we doing floating point addition with the risk of round off? Or are you taking 2.5 and converting it over to an integer and it's either 2 or 3 and then doing the addition? Okay. It's just a question of strictness. Where on the spectrum do you want to be? Why do I bring this up? Many of you are writing programs. How many of those programs are going to make assumptions to be helpful to the user? And how many times are they going to say, this is ambiguous, therefore I'm not going to be useful to you. I'm just going to stop and hopefully print out an error message and tell you what the ambiguity is. If somebody doesn't specify the name of the output file for saving the results, do you A, refuse to do anything? You must give me the name of an output file. Do you B, guess what a sensible name for an output file would be? Well, your input's called experiment5.input, therefore the output will be called experiment5.output. Okay, that's what most programs would do. Or C, does it just say, if you haven't given me a name, I will always choose the same name for my output. It will always be called default.output. Okay? Which is also, in many cases, a sensible choice. Because that way, nobody has to remember the name of the input file. If I didn't tell you where to save the output is in default.output. Right? You only have to remember one thing. You don't have to remember a rule, and you don't have to remember that when I started the program last night before I went home, I told it to use the input experiment122753.input. And therefore, when I come in this morning, I should look for experiment13753.output. How many people noticed that I gave you different numbers? Right. Okay? You've got exactly the same spectrum to deal with when you're writing your programs, and this is where it comes from. I cannot tell you what the right choice is for your users. How do you determine what the right choice is?
You ask the user.
You ask the user.